much, Ruben, for that amazing introduction. The theme of today's TEDx is Who Cares? And I must admit that I remembered it incorrectly at the beginning and thought it was Why Care? But I think I did that because I actually believe that's a more relevant question. So the theme of my speak today is Why Care? I believe that all of us, when we look back in time, we can find moments that when they happened, they seemed quite unimportant and not very memorable, but that later in life, we actually realized how significant they were to change the direction of our lives. In my case, I had one of those moments in 2002. I'd been working in Buenos Aires for 4 years and was just about to move back to Sweden. I was working for this big company, this Swedish big company, and I was handing over my responsibilities. One night, I was driving home from the office to my apartment, quite late at night. I was driving through this really gloomy and unsecure area and stopped at a red light. Beside me on the curb was a little boy about 4 to 5 years old, and he was begging. And my first reaction was to send an angry thought to his parents. How could they let him, alone, stand there in this really shady place, begging at this time of night, which was at an hour far beyond his bedtime? A few days later, I drove through the same area, but this time it was much later and even far beyond my preferred bedtime. And when I stopped at the red light, I saw a little pile of cardboard on the curb. And just as the light turned to green, I realized that it was the little boy who had huddled up underneath the cardboard trying to get some sleep. I will always wonder what would have happened if I had stepped out of the car trying to do something for him. But instead I drove off in bewilderment and at loss of what to do. Now, this was one of those moments that I believe changed the mindset of myself, and maybe the first step towards this. I slowly but surely started to lose motivation in doing what I was doing for the big Swedish company, with the main purpose of creating value for the shareholders. And I ended up leaving the company, and after a few jobs and a few years, I was offered the position as an executive director of Operations Malin in Sweden, with the purpose to build up the organization in the Swedish market. And I don't know if you know what Operation Smile is, but it's a medical charity that was founded in 1982 and that helps children that are born with cleft in low-income and middle-income countries in the world and offer them free treatment. Now, we may think that cleft is a niche problem, but I can assure you that for these children born with cleft and to their families, it's not a niche problem at all. Cleft is one of the most common birth defects in the world, and about 250,000 children are born every year with this facial deformity, and the absolute majority are born in countries where the treatment is either not existent or very, very limited. A cleft surgery doesn't have to take much more than an hour and can cost the equivalent of half an iPhone. And still, most of the children born with this in the world are deprived of this treatment that they so badly need. If you're born with cleft and you don't get treatment, you're very likely to have difficulties talking, speaking, eating, drinking, and many times you're rejected from society. Very few attend school due to bullying, and their prospects in life in terms of employment and family life are quite poor. In the Western world, children born with cleft are offered comprehensive treatment with surgery, dental treatment, speech therapy, etc. But even in the low and middle income countries where the treatment is available, it's normally far too expensive for the families. And I believe that all children actually deserve to go through this transformation. Now, maybe one of the worst things is that 1 out of 10% of the children born with cleft every year die before their first birthday. And the main reason for that is that they starve to death because of their cleft palate. This is a very common sight for our medical volunteers at Operation Smile missions. And Operation Smile has, since the founding of the organization in 1982, treated more than 200,000 children. And Operation Smile has been able to do that thanks to dedicated medical volunteers that offer their time and competence, and to amazing donors around the world who help us to pay for this. Now, it may be difficult to understand the... Oh, sorry. I wanted to show you a few kids that actually did get help by Operation Smile. This is Danila. She's from Brazil. She was about 5 years when this photo was taken, and this was taken a few years later. Sorry. And this is little Nan from the Philippines, who today is a beautiful young girl that we are actually still in contact with. It may be difficult to understand what these families with children born with cleft go through. And I met a mother, when I was in Peru, I met a girl who was the mother of a child with cleft, and how giving birth to this child actually turned her life upside down, was what she told me. Lucero was 17 years old when she gave birth to Jean-Pierre. He had a bad cleft lip and cleft palate, meaning a hole in his lip and a hole up his gum. She was 17 years old, and she wasn't married to Jean-Pierre's father. When the father came to the hospital to see his son and realized that he was born with this facial deformity, he said, "That cannot be my son." Turned around, walked out of the hospital, and was never seen again. Lucero came from quite poor circumstances, so she had no support from her parents. And in addition, this desperate 17-year-old was told by a nurse in the hospital that the reason why your child has been born with this facial deformity is because of your promiscuous life. Fortunately, Lucero had a sister who offered her and Jean-Pierre a home, but she was still, of course, very depressed because she believed her son would live his entire life with a big hole in his lip and his gum. To sustain herself and her son, she helped her sister in the vegetable store that she was running. One day, a man comes in, just as Jean-Pierre had started to cry, hungry, in the back of the store. Now, because of his cleft, she couldn't breastfeed him, so she was heating the formula. But this man came in and he said, no, go and breastfeed your kid while I'll wait for you. And she was saying, no, it's okay, I'll tend you. You know, it's fine. And he was giving her such a hard time for not prioritizing to feed her child that finally she got fed up with him and invited him to the back of the store and pointed at her child and said, "Do you really think it's possible to breastfeed someone with a hole up his gum?" And the man, of course, asked for forgiveness and said, "Do you know that there's an organization called Operation Smile where you can get help?" Now, when I met Lucero and Jean-Pierre, 5 years had passed since her first encounter with Operación Sonrisa, which is the name of the organization in Peru. At this time, Lucero was a bright and cheerful 22-year-old who was studying to become a pharmacist, and her main goal in life was to secure that her son got enough speech therapy so that his speech wouldn't become a problem in the future because of his cleft palate. She had received a lot of psychological counseling, and Jean-Pierre had had several surgeries, and when I met them, he had just had his final surgery for his cleft. He doesn't look very happy here because it was actually quite painful for him. But in the long run, it was good. Now, this is a typical story that one meets within Operation Smile, a story of hope and encouragement. And when I started my journey with Operation Smile, I hadn't met Lucero yet. So even though I was highly motivated to do a great job, it was still quite intellectually. I was intellectually motivated. But that changed when I went on my first trip with Operation Smile with destination Ethiopia. Together with a crew of medical volunteers from both Ethiopia and other countries, I came to the Menelik Hospital in Addis Ababa. There were hundreds of children, teenagers, adults waiting for surgery for us there. One of the patients that was waiting, I'm sorry, I love this photo because it's such a cute baby, and the mother was so anxious for her to get a surgery. And I hate showing photos of children before surgery without showing the photo after surgery. So this is what she looked like when we left 10 days later. But these patients, they came from all over Ethiopia, and some had even traveled from other countries. There was one girl who came who was 18 years old. She had traveled from Mogadishu in Somalia, a trip that took more than a week. She came there with her cousin, who spoke a little bit of English, and her sister. Her name was Shams, and she was wearing a burqa. When it was time for the medical examination of her, I asked her cousin if it would be okay for her to take off her burqa in the outside space that we used for parts of the medical examinations due to lack of space inside. He said, no, actually it would be really good if you could try to find a room inside, and preferably that there are no men around when she takes off the burqa. So because we had a medical photographer on the mission who was a man, I filled in for him and went together with a plastic surgeon from here in Uppsala, Malin Forsgren. We brought Shams into this cramped little room to screen her. We soon realized we had to help her to take off the burqa and all the shawls, and it was really difficult to connect to her. Her eyes were going back and forth, she was shaking, and so was I. Malin put a hand on my shoulder and comforted me and said, remember, we're doing this for her. So finally, we'd taken off all the shawls, and we both had to take a deep breath. She had the most severe deformity I've ever seen. She had a double-sided cleft. It had been allowed to develop over the years, 18 years, and had gone all directions. Her lip hadn't been covering the teeth, and because of that, they'd rotted away. However, even though it was really severe, Malin concluded that it was possible to offer her a surgery. So she was scheduled for surgery a few days later. When it was time, it had been a long day. We knew this was going to be a long surgery as well because it was quite complicated. And it was getting dark outside. Malin said to me, come with me in the operating room. You can be here as an observer. But when she started with, the serious business of cutting and slicing, etc., I felt like I had to withdraw for a little moment until the worst part was over. I came outside of the operating room area and I saw Shams' cousin pacing anxiously back and forth outside of the entrance door. I walked out to him to tell him not to worry, that everything was going okay, that the surgery was going fine, and that Malin was an amazing surgeon and Shams would be perfect, etc. But then, being the little self-righteous Swede as I am, I couldn't help but pointing out to him that we had noted how underweight Shams was, and that maybe they could try to make her eat a little bit better. He looked me in the eyes and he said, we know. Her mother's been trying to make her to eat for the past 2 months, but nothing works. You see, 2 months ago, a group of men came to the suburb outside of Mogadishu where they live and decided to rape Shams. Her father tried to intervene and was killed in front of her eyes. So since then, she hasn't been eating or speaking. I, of course, wanted to vanish from this earth. And with tears in my eyes, I asked for apologize. I apologized to him. And I said, I really hope that this surgery can bring something positive to Sham's life. A few days later, the mission was about to be over, and it was time for post-operative checks of all the patients. When Shams came in, all the volunteers went silent. She had taken off her burqa. And the person that she'd been mostly in contact with during the mission was the speech therapist. So she, her cousin, and the sister walks up to the speech therapist, and the first words Shams had uttered during the entire mission, she said to her sister to ask her to translate, "Tell her that I will never again cover my face." And that this girl, with this tragic story behind her, would never again cover her face, made me feel that all the efforts, the time, the money that had gone into this mission were justified. And it also made me really emotionally involved. And it kind of proved the philosophy of the amazing guy who founded Operation Smile, the plastic surgeon Bill McGee, who together with Kathy, his wife, founded the organization in 1982. Bill often says, reason leads to conclusions, but emotion leads to action. And I believe that's true. I think that if you really care about something, that's when you act to generate a change. And a couple of months ago, I left Operation Smile to be closer to my family. And it's been a real challenge to find something as rewarding to do in life as working with Operation Smile. But fortunately, I had a few other of those moments a couple of years back when I was working on a ship in Antarctica. My close encounters with penguins and whales and the visible changes to the environment due to the global warming made me really worry about this planet Earth. And emotion leads to action. So my next challenge is to work with the corporate sector to support them in making choices that are beneficial both to their shareholders and to the environment. And when I was preparing this talk, I Googled why care, and people seem to have all sorts of answers to this. I found a few of them. I like most of them. But maybe this is just it. I care because I can. And I want to create change. And to generate action, I believe we need emotion. Thank you very much.